Hello and welcome to episode 42 of Let Them Eat Cake. This will be the first part of a two-part episode. My name is Jack. My co-hosts are John and Ace. Today we are talking to the founder and writer of Sinotalk. As you could gather from the name, his content centers upon China from political to social. We delve into the CCP and its leadership, the state of the country, and much more. But before that, let's get to some headlines.
We have a weapon more powerful than the British Empire, and that weapon is our refusal to bow to any order but our own, any institution but our own.
First up, I'm going to be talking about European immigration policy changes. The European Union is looking to follow the United Kingdom's lead when it comes to immigration policy. Germany, Italy, Austria, and Denmark are looking to export their irregular migrants to third-party nations. For the UK, it was Rwanda. For Italy, it's looking to be Albania, and the rest are up in the air. Either way, this policy is said to be some kind of deterrent, but history and attempts by vastly different foreign nations elsewhere in the world has shown it's failed. Some of these countries are also looking towards shipping irregular migrants to some kind of offshore prison complex like Australia did with Christmas Island and Nauru over the last 20 years. Another policy also shared by Australia would be immediate deportation to a secondary designated safe nation for whoever is seeking asylum. The issue is these nations like Austria don't have access to these isolated island colonies like Australia does. Also taking into account that Australia is an island continent and could be argued that it requires a unique take.
The EU
on
itself literally
immigration.
doesn't have an island to put them on
Yeah.
like we do. There's literally nothing they can do. I don't know
Yeah,
what they're
so
thinking.
it's like you could make an argument that Australia would need some kind of unique take on immigration and irregular migrants. This isn't it. The plan is, again, like it was in Australia, a panic response to a crisis that the governments of these countries are either too lazy, malicious, or stupid to comprehend or deal with, and will lead to the same humanitarian crises that were faced when these actions were performed by the Australian state. These culminated in basically decades or more of essentially imprisonment for people fleeing persecution or claiming to be fleeing persecution. So yeah, that's looking pretty cool, pretty good.
Doesn't France have overseas departments that they could send them to? I mean,
France probably does.
France isn't exactly involved with this. France is so France and Germany both closed. They used to accept migrants and they've recently closed that. That's the big update there. But this has largely been run and an idea that's been created. Well, it was kind of first Rishi Sunak, and then Maloney came along and perfected it in a way. Yeah. But the whole thing is she wants to push them to Albania before they reach Italy, so they can't claim asylum, right? And she already has the Libyans killing people on the other side of the ocean. But the funny part is that when she negotiated this deal with Albania to take these people, Rishi Sunak immediately was like, "Hey, can we get in on this?" And it's like, "Who are you? You're not even a part of this conversation. Go home."
Basically all the ex-fascist nations, which is pretty funny.
Italy is also mad at the EU, even though they're super poor. Well, not super poor. They're the second worst economy is the proper way to say it, So they're behind Greece. So they have basically a federal bank that bails out banks individually if a certain country's central bank gets a run, then the EU has a big vault to ensure that and bail out that bank. She doesn't like that because, of course, fascists are always against central banks for some reason. That's a big hang up that they have. Is central banks, even though Italy has benefited from this policy getting bailed out in the past. I think 3 different times. I don't know.
Anyway, talking about Italy.
One time they invaded Ethiopia.
One and only colony of Eritrea borders the next country we're going to be talking about.
While we're in Europe, Lukashenko, he made himself basically president for life. He already was, but he said president is now immune from prosecution, and then he anyone who he banned with like political exile, like they had to flee the country, like the opposition did. The opposition leader, that is, they're now banned from running. They can't run anymore. And it's like, okay, buddy, whatever makes you feel better. Like he already has power. He already won. Like, but yeah, so a little bit of an extension into the Red Sea crisis. A lot of people are more focused on the Houthi side, things like that. But as we've been reporting, there has been some escalations with Ethiopia. They say that they're because they're a landlocked country because Eritrea used to be part of it. Now it's not. Ethiopia basically said it's a matter of national security to have port access. So they literally are saying they will go to war over port access. So this has been complicated for a little while. A few months ago, Djibouti, basically their port contract fell out. Ethiopia was getting like high taxes anyway. It wasn't really a fair deal to them. But this culminates with the most recent update in this. And it's a lot of people don't know this place exists, but it's the nation of Somaliland. Somaliland, basically, Italy and Britain had different pieces of Somalia. The British part is where Somaliland is. They have been independent since the 1990s, maybe the 2000, I think 2001 or something like that. They held their official referendum, own currency, own passport, own license plate, own police force. They have consulates in different countries. Like they're like one of the most legitimate nations, and like you'll never see them as recognized as something like Kosovo. But what's also interesting is Taiwan is one of their like really, really good allies, because like they're just like Taiwan because they want to be independent from Somalia. So Ethiopia went in here to this independent nation that nobody recognizes. Not nobody, but you know what I mean. And they got a deal with them to access a port for 50 years, which is like awesome for Ethiopia. Even though we don't like the guy running it, Somalia didn't like this because it's like they don't recognize it. They want a stake in the pot. They're like, no, you have to go through us. We have to get the money. They're just how like China cries when Nancy Pelosi visits.
Didn't they launch jets as
I
like
don't. They do all
a
that kind of
chest
stuff.
thumping thing?
But the thing is that the United States, a lot of people somehow want to turn this into America bad, but like the United States doesn't recognize this place. They're not exactly like cool with Ethiopia because of the genocide, but the United States like is in Somalia. So like, what is Somalia gonna do? The United States are standing right there to be like, back it up, guys. You're going right back home. Like they can't mobilize an army. Like, what are they gonna
there's
do?
no way. There's no way.
Yeah.
You know
So
who
That would
can
be
mobilize?
ballsy.
go ahead, Ace.
You know who can mobilize?
Al Shabaab.
Al-Shabaab
Before
can
we get there, I
mobilize.
just wanted to comment. Somaliland, they actually have a little bit of an ISIS problem. What's the sap called that they gave the baby Jesus? Frankincense. They farm frankincense. So you like cut the trees and the sap comes out.
Yeah.
And so like ISIS has been controlling some of these fields and like taxing people, but it's like a very small presence. And Somaliland is technically the most free country in the region. If you go down to like Kenya, Rwanda, they have more, but just like in that Horn region, Somaliland is technically the most free. They've had 5 peaceful elections, electing 3 different presidents between those elections, and they have Freedom House gives them a 44 out of 100 ranking, which gives them the status of partly free. I know a while back they used to be considered like fully free on that index.
But
Yeah, I know it hasn't been too great lately.
Back to the fellas, Al-Shabaab, sorry, which is basically what their name translates to is the fellas. So they've done a lot of saber rattling towards Ethiopia because of this deal, and because they see it as kind of taking a similar position to Somalia here. They see it as like a violation of their, territorial integrity or whatever. And they've their spokespeople have made a lot of speeches threatening Ethiopia, this, that, and the other. They've held rallies in areas where they have like a zone of influence, we'll call it. A lot of people show up to those rallies. I mean, in general, across Somalia, even in non-Al-Shabaab controlled areas, there have been a lot of protests regarding what Somaliland and Ethiopia have cooked up And I think it's important to remember that this is definitely one of those moments where I think an eye should be kept on Al Shabaab, because this is something I think they would be willing to focus some of their I guess their operational power or their means towards, because if you understand the history of Al Shabaab, when they sort of emerged as an independent entity back in 2006, it was when UN-backed Ethiopian troops and Somali government forces started an offensive against their predecessor organization called the Islamic Courts Union, and that was kind of basically when Al Shabaab kind of came into its own, and they kind of became their own thing. They sort of distinguished themselves from the rest of the umbrella organization that they were under, which, as I mentioned earlier, was the Islamic Courts Union. So this is kind of historically, like, I don't know if a soft spot is the word for them, but but this is something where, there's some pretty recent history there, and I think they would be very willing to, I don't know, do something to fuck this up if they could. I mean, if you recall, a few months back, they attacked that the Lapset port court. I mean, they've done it several times, but they occasionally carry out attacks on this thing called the Lapset corridor, I believe it's called, which is this like Chinese backed and sort of East African backed, like project out in Kenya, where they're basically trying to build like some, it's a several different economic
Yeah, it's part of the whole like East
yeah.
African Economic
Yeah,
Union that's supposed
yeah.
to like
There's
uplift the
several
area.
different economic projects there. One of them's a port, another one's like a highway. And so every now and again they'll just go in there, they'll send some guys over the border, they'll, shoot up the workers, set up some IEDs to target trucks that are working there, stuff like that. So this is something where you could see some cross-border attacks here and there if this is something that Somaliland and Ethiopia decide that they're going to go through with.
What's also interesting is that in the past, I mean, they had to pull out because of the Tigray genocide. They had to concentrate their forces to commit the genocide. But Ethiopia used to be part of the peacekeeping mission in Somalia. So they were
Yeah, Amazon.
fighting on
Yeah,
behalf of the Somali government, their forces there before. So to
yeah.
go and
If
now recognize Somaliland and do this, it's a pretty big shakeup of the politics
Yeah,
of the
I
region.
mean, if I recall, their troops might still be there till the end of it, till like now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
because
Yeah,
I think the Amazon troops are pulling out right now. The Amazon troops being like the African Union forces that are doing a peacekeeping
yeah,
mission in
one of the
Somalia.
reasons why the United States had to go back in is because so many Ethiopian troops got pulled out to go to
Yeah.
Tigray.
Um, you got anything else you want to touch on, or should I get started on this um big ol' big ol' rise up in.
Yeah, we can go ahead.
Alrighty. So some of you, by the time this is uploaded, will have seen this, but there's been a bit of a shit show, for lack of a better term, coming into the fray in Ecuador, and basically within the last 24 hours, armed men who were probably almost all of which definitely part of gangs and organized crime groups over there have taken over a TV station. They've, entered high schools and universities. They've set cars on fires, set off explosions in the capital of Quito. There was one video of a guy who was armed with an RPG on the side of the road in the port city of Guayaquil. Um, and it's reached such a point where the Ecuadorian president Daniel Nabao, he basically declared like a state of internal conflict against 20 different gangs or criminal organizations in the country. And basically, so to kind of track this back to what set this off is on Monday, this guy who we have talked about previously on this show, if you the few of you who watch this very diligently might remember, um, this guy named
This is
Adolfo.
going to be the first one where I'm going to separate this beginning piece too. So
Okay.
Hopefully now people will be more up to date on like headlines if we start separating them. So
Yeah. So this guy, Adolfo Fito, that's his nickname, Macias, basically on Monday, well, Sunday he disappeared from his cell, and he was in prison and he disappeared from his cell. He's serving this like 34-year sentence for drug trafficking, murder, being part of organized crime, all the good stuff. And he disappears from his cell on Sunday. On Monday, the police say he's gone. He's not in prison. And this guy Fito, he's the leader of this drug trafficking gang called the Los Choneros, which the name comes from. They're from a coastal city in the country called Chon, so Choneros. That's what the name means basically. And he disappears from his cell, right? And so the country's president declares a state of emergency for 60 days, which is kind of this thing Ecuador does anytime shit gets out of hand with organized crime groups. Whoever the president is, back in like a couple months ago, it was Guillermo Lasso. Now it's this Nabao guy. They declare a state of emergency. That's kind of their go-to thing. They place a curfew, etc. And some of the organized crime groups come out and say, you know what, fuck your state of emergency. We're not doing that. And so the day after Fito gets out of prison, and all this stuff happens. There's the video, the guys, they've taken over the TV station, the coastal city of Guayaquil. They're attacking universities, they're attacking high schools, they've taken some of the students in some of these high schools hostages. They've the prisons in the country, a lot of which are run by these criminal gangs. They've taken a lot of the prison guard hostages. There are several videos out there of them executing prison guards in some cases across, prisons just like nationwide. And yeah, so for those of you like wondering how it could have reached this point, we're going to go back a little bit and then we're going to go back even further. So this Fito guy who got out of prison, I think it's important to mention that he's done this before. He escaped from a maximum security prison before, and he was on the run for 10 months. So like this is like the second time he's escaped from a jail, right? And so the reason he was in prison this time was, well, obviously you've got the drug trafficking and the murder charges and all that, but back in August he was suspected of being involved in the assassination of a presidential candidate in Ecuador called Fernando Villavicencio, and they took him out of the prison that the regional prison that he was in, and then they briefly transferred him over to a maximum security prison called La Roca. And between him being transferred out of the regional prison and into La Roca, the maximum security prison, he ended up back in the regional prison. I'm not exactly sure what went down there, but somehow he went from the maximum security prison again after being suspected of this murder of a presidential candidate back into a regional prison, and now he's out for all intents and purposes, right? And yeah, and the thing is, and we've talked about this on other shows, but the assassination back in August of the presidential candidate Villavicencio was kind of a buildup of several incidents involving organized crime or organized crime linked incidents in the country, right? So in the month before that, just the month before that, the mayor of the port city of Manta, a guy named Agustin Intriago, was shot dead while inspecting some like public works thing in the city, and that was on July 23rd. And so in July 24th, the president at the time, Guillermo Lasso, declared a state of emergency in 3 of the country's coastal provinces. Now it's important to remember the coastal provinces are kind of the hotspot for this type of like gang and drug activity, because this is where the gangs, the drug trafficking groups, whatever you want to call them, this is where they export and they import a lot of their product, and this is how they make their money. It's through the ports, and this is obviously, if it's through the ports, that's where a lot of their presence is going to be. So on the 24th, he declares a state of emergency because there were clashes in just kind of throughout the coastal areas of the country that had left 8 people dead. And then on July 25th, the president declares another state of emergency amidst violence in the prison system that left 31 people dead and 90 prison guards had been taken hostage. Now, when I'm talking about like how, you're probably thinking, how can prisoners take prison guards hostage? That doesn't make any sense. Ecuadorian prisons are very overcrowded. They're pretty much run by the criminal groups. The clashes in the prisons are batshit insane. Like, to put this into perspective, like I was saying earlier, when Fito was transferred out of the regional prison to a maximum security prison back in August, they had to deploy over 3,000 members of the security forces just to pull this off. They had to send in 3,000 dudes to take one guy out and transfer him to another prison. And when they were in there, they found in Fito, like where Fito was basically living, they found like a bunch of hash, bunch of cocaine, speaker systems, stereo, TV. The guy had like multiple refrigerators. Like the guy, it wasn't prison for him. It was a vacation. So the thing is a lot of these bosses in these Ecuadorian prisons, they can run their operation out of prison, and the gangs basically run the prison, right? Which is why you see as soon as Fito's out of jail and they declare the state of emergency, you see, prison guards being taken hostage. Who's to, and I mean, like, when I say taken hostage, I'm using that term loosely because these could be guys who have been taken hostage by the gang members who are in prison. Like previously, they were already hostages to begin with. But I mean, it's the clashes in Ecuador's prisons have been like a pretty big national topic for a while now. As far as I know, I think over 400 people have been killed in Ecuadorian prisons. That's between like gang members and clashes between like gang members and guards, and just bystanders. I'm sorry, like the guy who robbed a bank who's in the prison got killed or whatever. That over 400 people have been killed in these prisons nationally since like 2021. So it's a very like sensitive issue at the time. I should mention, however, the police did manage to the TV station I was talking about earlier, kind of the video you'll see most of in this when you're looking at this conflict, I guess you'll call it. That is that has recent that was within like a couple hours that was secured by police, and all the people involved in taking the TV crew and the people in the station hostage were arrested. So yeah, I mean, this is kind of a developing story. There's a lot yet to be seen. I mean, the way it seems is it's pretty much more or less that the government has declared war on 20 different like criminal gangs, and it remains to be seen what's going to happen, whether they're going to get this under control or if it's going to like explode into a wider thing. And if it wasn't already clear from my explanation, this is kind of something that's been building up. Kind of, Ecuador's always had an organized crime problem since like the 90s. And it kind of really got out into the early 2000s, and it kind of seems that with the things that have happened over there within the last 6 months, that this is kind of the culmination of all of that just kind of exploding onto the surface. So it remains to be seen what's going to be happen. Some analysts believe, and I remember people were saying this back in August when Villavicencio was assassinated, but some people believe that the reason criminal organizations in Ecuador have gotten more bold is because since there are a lot of different peace deals with groups like FARC and the ELN in Colombia, that they're thinking the tide is shifting from Colombia being the main cocaine exporter of the world to Ecuador. So the Mexican cartels who, traffic cocaine up into the U.S. and worldwide, basically, there's this belief among some analysts that they're shifting kind of that operation to Ecuador, since it's not as feasible through through Colombia nowadays for several reasons, including like just the general, not just like the peace deals, but crack down on the general production of cocaine and things like that.
Even they can't
So
use the narco subs really anymore.
who's to say? I mean, most of this smuggling in Ecuador is being done through the ports.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's kind of like it's one of those things again, and it should be noted that the gang that Los Choneros, the gang that Fito's the head of, it has like these alleged but unconfirmed ties to the Sinaloa cartel. Now, if you ask a lot of people, they'll say those ties are definitely confirmed. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of just this what's exploded in Ecuador right now is a bit of a culmination of things that have been building up for the last 6 months, if not the last 20 years. So
As well with Mexico, I would say that might be the one to watch right now, as for like upcoming news. Because as the year begins to start and the Congress comes back, they're still going to be holding these aid packages for Israel and Ukraine, and then we're going to want to get like immigration policy done. Mexico has started cracking down on immigration. Immigration has dropped significantly because they're preventing people from even getting to the border. And basically, in return, Mexico wants $20 billion to get work permits for all of the Hispanic countries in the region. So, like, just not only like Latin America, but also Central American countries here. And another part of that is that he wants the blockade on Cuba lifted and the sanctions in Venezuela lifted. So, along with that, there's also his rail project, and he's leaving soon. Like it's like the end of his term.
you're talking about AMLO here, correct?
Yeah. So his rail
The Mexican
project
president.
has just like he is like advanced it through like making, because like it's really kind of shits on indigenous land rights and stuff, this railroad that he's doing, but it's like to link the poorest region in the south of Mexico, right? And so it's supposed to be like a mega project that's supposed to uplift them or something. But the thing is that because it's been protested and like deemed unconstitutional because it doesn't like respect land rights, he's made it a national security thing to push it through, and it looks like it's basically happening now. So there's a lot of developing stuff going on with Mexico, and because it's a neighbor of the United States, it's more important than people think, especially when this is going to be a key component of when Congress comes back, because they want to make sure that we can exploit the migrant workers as much as possible. So to counter that, he's saying they're going to get secure work permits to counter all the ones that aren't coming over illegally and then getting work permits when they're here, and not even work permits, but under the table work and stuff. So interesting trade-off.
Speaking of groups that transcend borders are an issue of national security, I did want to just touch on this one thing real quick. That was a really bad transition. I'm sorry, but
No, you're fine.
I did want to touch on this a little bit. So maybe a week or two ago, the Islamic State, or the so-called Islamic State, or ISIS or IS or whatever the fuck you want to call them, they basically made a general rally or call to arms or whatever you will, which they label as kill them where you find them, which in ISIS speak is basically like a call to arms in a way, and because of it. Because their new leader has made this call, I guess, to different ISIS affiliates worldwide, we have seen an uptick in the last week or two in sort of Islamic State attacks globally. We've seen attacks in Nigeria, in Iran, in Cameroon, in the Philippines, in Iraq, in Syria, in where else? We saw some in Mali. Now, it is important to note that this doesn't mean, okay, I cannot stress this enough. This doesn't mean that, ISIS is back out of the blue all of a sudden, like a lot of people on Twitter seem to think for whatever reason. It's very important to note, ISIS is, whenever you see an uptick in ISIS activity, that doesn't mean they're back. That means there are certain circumstances that are leading to this uptick in activity. Okay, ISIS never went away. Okay, I don't know what Donald Trump told you guys, but they never.
He died like a dog.
They never left. They were always here. All right, and especially when you look at some of these, like for example, if you look at the Philippines and Nigeria, these are countries that see like ISIS attacks on the weekly. You know, Mozambique. This is a country attack. This is a country that sees like Islamic State attacks monthly, if not weekly, in some cases. If you look at Mali, again, a country where almost an entire region in the east is completely cut off by ISIS, right? So it's like this isn't something that popped out of the blue.
It's just that they don't seem like a threat to the United States, so they stopped reporting on him.
Pretty much, and this is more or less an uptick in activity as opposed to like an uptick in existing activity, I should say, as opposed to an uptick in activity that wasn't present. So this is kind of like, and there's a multitude of factors that have led up to this. One of them is the that they cite, at least, is the war in Gaza. The other one is, and I've seen some people speculate on this, is there even before this, several months ago, you'd seen upticks in Islamic State attacks where you didn't really see them in places like Syria and Iraq, which weren't really places where you saw upticks in Islamic State activity, or like the Philippines, versus somewhere like Mali or Nigeria or Mozambique, where these things happen more regularly. So some people are saying that this uptick in activity is meant to spur like a greater, I guess you could say, like Islamic State like push, or I don't even want to use this word, but comeback, or like prominence that was already set in motion several months ago, if that makes sense. So yeah, you're gonna see a lot more of this stuff going around. That doesn't mean that they're like back. They've always been around, but it is an uptick in activity, and it is something to pay attention to, I think.
I mean, six months ago or so, they were talking, or people were talking about how ISIS might be looking to re-rise.
Yeah, they always call for it.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that particularly worries people is they're worried that and what you're like 6 months ago, 3 months ago, what was worrying people and is what worrying people right now, people don't care when, the Islamic State carries out attacks in fucking Mozambique or Nigeria or the Philippines or wherever. But what was worrying people is that they might try to rise up more prominently in places like Syria and Iraq. And the reason that worries people is, one, not only because of, I guess, the geographical importance of those countries, for one, and two, the fact that there are U.S. troops stationed there, and the U.S. has an obvious stake in those two countries. But the other thing too is once they would rise to prominence again in those two countries, every other country with an ISIS affiliate would follow suit. You know what I mean? That's kind of the thought process behind it. Is it's like, okay, if
domino theory.
Yeah, domino theory, right? That the idea is like, if they come back to prominence in Syria and Iraq, then they would become an even larger problem globally, even in these countries where, that like I was saying earlier, suffer from some sort of Islamic State attack weekly. You know what I mean? So again, it remains to be seen what's going to happen, but yeah.
I think most people who are in the Islamist side, like, their recruitment network is low because everyone hates them.
Yeah, no. Like, there's a lot of return to tradition in the sense of, in like online jihadist spaces, in the sense of like,
exactly.
Fuck ISIS, we like al-qeada now.
Well, I mean, if you look at ISIS, all they do is call people infidels, and like, you're an infidel because of this, you're a fake Muslim because of this, and it's nobody wants to deal with those people.
Yeah, it gets old. Like, there's no line, basically.
Mm-hmm.
They're the
They just cry
Islamist
all day.
version of an SJW.
Dude, they cry.
Like,
Yeah, seriously, they cry all day. They never stop.
it's
Always
like, and
complaining.
you got to remember, it's like I feel like, at least when you look at it in the case of, I think al-qeada and the Muslim Brotherhood kind of have this thing, like, among Islamists, where they have a very acute ability to attract, like, educated, and I guess you could say, like,
I think
intellectual people,
especially with the Muslim Brotherhood,
right?
it's
They've
like
always,
people are talking about with Palestine now, like a Muslim Brotherhood of Egypt resurgence if they deport the Palestinians to Sinai, and it's like, what about ISIS? Guys? What about ISIS?
yeah, right. That's yeah. I mean, I don't think Waliyat Sinai, the ISIS affiliate in Sinai, claimed a single attack in 2023. I mean, when they announced the new leader and they did, like, every affiliate has to send their pledge through, like, a video. The Sinai affiliate had like 3 dudes pledging. Like, that was it. Like, they had like 3 guys. One
Go
last
ahead.
thing.
Go ahead.
Like I was saying, but the thing that I was, real quick, just to finish my thought, like, the Muslim Brotherhood and Al Qaeda have this, like, acute ability to attract, like, smart, intelligent, educated people, whatever, because of their history, of having leadership who are of that background. I don't think ISIS really has that, and that's kind of why the tide is turned against them in some of these Islamist and jihadist spaces.
Their founder, in a sense, Zarqawi, by all accounts, could not read. So
yeah, I mean, the guy was like, I mean, the Zarqawi was no better than the dudes in Ecuador right now. He might have been even dumber. You know what I mean? Like, yeah.
So
Before that guy went old jihadi, he was like a pimp,
mhm.
a drug dealer, all that stuff. Like,
So to wrap this up, the reason why this is in 2 parts is because Sino Talk is like, he actually is like been to China. He spent time in China. So it's not just like some random guy who writes about China. He, is developing a field. He's like going to be one of those next like thinkers when it comes to Chinese strategy and how to relate with China. Like, it's only inevitable before he's on government advisory boards and stuff like that. So it's a very technical, but we talk very slow, but it's a very technical interview about China, because most people who talk about China have never been there. Like Jack and I get basically secondhand information from people like this. And North Korea is even worse. You can get no accurate news from North Korea.
And the other thing you got to remember with Sino Talk is, not only has he been to China, but he spent an extended period of time studying there, like in university.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, we're talking about a guy who has, like, he's been very enveloped in Chinese society and, academics. So again, this isn't some dude who decided to make China his focus area because he read a book on the great game between China and the United States. Like, this is a very well-read guy and well-lived guy on this topic and country.
Here's part
Subscribe
1
to
with
the
Sino
Patreon.
Talk. Yeah, subscribe to Patreon. YouTube. Yeah, call to action, guys. Do the call to action.
Yeah, the YouTube banned us for doing news.
Share
Subscribe
this
to Patreon for $1.
Yeah, subscribe. So we're also going to be doing the next tier up. We're going to probably put the movie content there, where we have like a more like a film review thing that's not newsy at all. But we have a lot of extra videos and stuff for $1 on the Patreon. And since YouTube demonetized us for reporting on the Houthis, anyone who
do you guys want to, like, rewatch Ichi the Killer and then review it?
I used to have it. I don't know who took it from me, but that's why I was just talking about 13 Assassins earlier. It's the same director.
No way, really? I should watch that. I'll watch
13
that.
It's so good. It's basically like A Bug's Life.